The blazing Kansas sun beat down mercilessly as Genevieve James stumbled through the dusty streets of Salina, her once fine dress hanging in tatters from her emaciated frame. The drought of 1874 had claimed everything her family's farm, her parents, and now, it seemed, it would claim her too. Thomas Quinn watched from the shade of his porch as the young woman staggered along Main Street, her gait unsteady, her sun-reddened face etched with desperation. The townsfolk hurried past, averting their eyes. Times were hard for everyone in Salina. Another desperate soul was nothing new. But something about this woman caught Thomas's attention. Perhaps it was the determined set of her jaw, or the way she refused to beg even as she clearly approached collapse. Whatever it was, he found himself standing, moving toward her as her knees finally buckled. "Miss, miss," Thomas called, his spurs jingling as he sprinted across the street. Dust billowed around them as he reached her side just as she crumpled to the ground. Genevieve felt strong arms catch her before her head hit the dirt. Through blurred vision, she saw a man's weathered face peering down at her, concern evident in his deep blue eyes. "Water," she croaked, her throat so dry the word barely escaped. "I've got you," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, which, after weeks of near starvation, wasn't far from the truth. Thomas carried the woman to his modest home at the edge of town, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. Inside, he gently set her on his worn sofa and hurried to fetch water and food. Genevieve drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of being moved, of cool water on her lips. When her eyes finally focused, she found herself in an unfamiliar room, a man sitting nearby, watching her with patient eyes. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. He moved to her side, offering a cup of water. "Drink slowly now," she obeyed, savoring each precious sip. "Thank you," she whispered when she could speak again. "Name's Thomas Quinn," he said, reaching for a plate on the side table. "Most folks call me Tom." He offered her a thick slice of bread spread with butter. "Reckon you could use this more than I could." Genevieve accepted the bread with trembling hands, fighting the urge to devour it whole. She took a small bite, nearly weeping at the taste. "Genevieve James," she managed between careful bites. I don't know how to repay your kindness, Mr. Quinn." Thomas shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. "No need for that, and it's Tom, please." He gestured around the simple but clean cabin. "This is your home now, at least until you've got your strength back and can decide what you want to do next." "My home," Genevieve echoed, confusion and gratitude warring within her. "If you'll have it," Tom replied simply. "Got a spare room and more food than one man needs." Seems the Christian thing to do. Tears spilled down Genevieve's cheeks as the full weight of his kindness hit her. For the first time in months, she felt something beyond hunger and fear. She felt hope. "Thank you," she whispered again, unable to find words adequate for her gratitude. Tom nodded, a slight smile softening his weathered features. "Rest now. There'll be time for talking later." As Genevieve finished the bread and drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks, neither she nor Tom could have imagined how their lives would intertwine in the coming months, or how the simple act of kindness on a dusty street in Salina would change both their destinies forever. 3 days passed before Genevieve felt strong enough to leave her bed for more than a few minutes. Tom proved to be a surprisingly attentive caretaker, bringing her simple meals and checking on her regularly, though he gave her plenty of space. On the 4th morning, Genevieve awoke feeling truly hungry for the first time since her collapse. She dressed in clothes Tom had procured from somewhere, simple but clean garments that were slightly too large but infinitely better than her tattered dress. She made her way to the main room of the cabin to find Tom cooking breakfast over the stove. "Well, good morning," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Thought I heard you moving about. How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thank you," Genevieve replied, self-consciously tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I hope I'm not imposing on your hospitality too greatly." Tom chuckled. "Hardly. It's nice having someone else around the place." He gestured to the table. "Breakfast is nearly ready. Hope you like eggs and bacon." Genevieve's stomach rumbled in response, bringing a flush to her cheeks and a laugh from Tom. As they ate together, Genevieve finally felt composed enough to explain her circumstances. "I came from Illinois," she began, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. "My parents died of fever last winter. My father's brother offered me a place in his home, but his intentions," she faltered, "were less than honorable," Tom supplied, his jaw tightening. Genevieve nodded. "I left in the night with what little money I had. I thought I could make it to Colorado, where my mother's cousin lives, but the journey proved more difficult than I anticipated. I ran out of funds in Topeka and tried to find work, but—" "Times are hard everywhere," Tom said. "This drought's been merciless." "Yes. I walked from Topeka, hoping to find work along the way. By the time I reached Salina, I hadn't eaten in nearly 3 days." Tom was quiet for a moment, considering her story. "Colorado's still a fair distance," he said finally. "You're welcome to stay here until you're strong enough to continue your journey, or longer if you've a mind to." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Tom interrupted gently. "Truth is, I could use some help around here. I've got a small ranch just outside town. Nothing fancy, but it keeps me busy. If you're willing to help with cooking and keeping the house, I'd consider it fair exchange for room and board." Genevieve studied him, searching for any hint of ulterior motives in his offer, but found only sincerity in his sun-weathered face. "That's very generous," she said cautiously. "But I wouldn't want people to talk. A young woman living in the home of a bachelor." Tom's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Folks'll talk regardless. But if it eases your mind, Mrs. Hollister from the church comes by twice a week to help with mending and such. She's known me since I was knee-high and would tan my hide if I stepped out of line." This brought a genuine smile to Genevieve's face. "In that case, Mr. Quinn, I accept your offer, at least until I can save enough for my journey to Colorado." "Tom," he reminded her with a smile, "and that's settled then." As the days turned into weeks, Genevieve gradually regained her strength. True to his word, Tom treated her with nothing but respect, giving her space while ensuring she had everything she needed. Mrs. Hollister, a formidable widow in her 60s, indeed came by twice weekly, eyeing Genevieve with initial suspicion that gradually warmed to approval as she observed the young woman's industrious nature and proper manners. Genevieve found herself settling into life at the Quinn Ranch with surprising ease. The work was hard but satisfying, keeping the house, preparing meals, tending to the small kitchen garden Tom had started but neglected. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in spectacular hues, while Tom told stories of his years as a trail rider before he'd saved enough to buy his small spread. By the time summer began to wane, Genevieve's plans to continue to Colorado had become increasingly vague. She found herself looking forward to Tom's return each evening, enjoying their quiet conversations and comfortable silences. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch after supper, Tom seemed unusually pensive. "Penny for your thoughts," Genevieve ventured after several minutes of silence. Tom turned to her, his expression serious. "Been thinking. Harvest will be coming soon, such as it is in this drought. I've arranged to help the Petersons with their wheat in exchange for a share. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing." "Of course," Genevieve replied. "I grew up on a farm. I know my way around a harvest." Tom nodded, still looking troubled. "Thing is, Jen, I've been wondering about your plans. Summer's nearly gone. If you're still set on Colorado, you might want to make that journey before winter sets in." Genevieve felt her heart sink at his words. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." Tom's response was immediate and forceful. He ran a hand through his sandy hair, clearly flustered. "No, quite the opposite. I'm asking if you want to stay." He met her eyes directly. "Permanently." Genevieve's breath caught. "Tom, are you not a proposal?" he clarified quickly, color rising in his cheeks. "Not yet, anyway." "That'd be presumptuous, considering. But I wanted you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it. No obligations, no expectations. Just, if you wanted to stay, I'd be glad of it." The sincerity in his voice made Genevieve's eyes sting with sudden tears. For months, she'd been without a home, without security. Now this good, kind man was offering both, asking nothing in return. "I would like to stay," she said softly. "Very much." Tom's smile in response was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Well then," he said, "that's settled." As autumn painted the Kansas landscape in gold and amber, Genevieve found herself truly happy for the first time since her parents' deaths. The harvest proved better than expected, providing enough to see them through the winter with some to spare. Tom used part of the proceeds to purchase a milk cow, which became Genevieve's particular charge. They fell into comfortable routines, working side by side during the day and sharing the evening hours with conversation or reading aloud from Tom's small collection of books. Sometimes Tom would play his harmonica while Genevieve mended or knitted by the fire, the simple melodies filling the cabin with warmth. It was during these quiet evenings that Genevieve began to acknowledge the growing affection she felt for Tom. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was something deeper. Something that made her pulse quicken when their hands accidentally touched, or when she caught him watching her with that particular soft expression. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the prairie in white just before Thanksgiving. Tom spent the morning chopping extra wood while Genevieve prepared for their first holiday together, baking bread and pies with supplies they'd carefully saved. When Tom came in for the midday meal, he brought with him a small wooden box. "Got something for you," he said, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. Genevieve wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "What is it? Early Christmas present, I suppose." He handed her the box. "Go on, open it." Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a silver pendant on a delicate chain, a simple star with a small pearl at its center. "Tom, it's beautiful," Genevieve breathed, touching it reverently. "Belonged to my mother," he explained. "One of the few things I have from her. Thought it might look nice on you." His eyes met hers. "For the Thanksgiving service tomorrow, if you'd like to wear it." Genevieve lifted the necklace from the box. "I'd be honored, would you?" She turned, lifting her hair. Tom's fingers were surprisingly gentle as he fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck. Genevieve felt his warm breath against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter chill. When she turned back to thank him, the words died on her lips. Tom was looking at her with such intensity, such clear longing, that it took her breath away. "Jen," he said hoarsely, "I've been trying to be patient, to give you time, but she didn't let him finish." Rising on tiptoe, Genevieve pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started tentative but quickly deepened as Tom's arms came around her, drawing her close against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since about a week after you got here," he admitted. Genevieve laughed softly. And here I thought I was being forward. His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Nothing about this has been conventional, has it? You collapsing at my feet, me bringing you home like a stray kitten. And now, Genevieve asked, suddenly serious. What happens now, Tom? He took her hands in his expression solemn. Now I court you properly if you'll allow it. And if, after a suitable time, you find your feelings match mine, then perhaps we might discuss a more permanent arrangement. And if I told you my feelings already match yours, Genevieve challenged gently. Tom's eyes darkened. Then I'd say we've already wasted too much time dancing around each other. He hesitated. But I want to do right by you, Jen. You deserve a proper courtship, not some rushed affair. Genevieve squeezed his hands. Then court me, Thomas Quinn, but know that my heart is already decided. His answering smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. That's good enough for me, Genevieve James. That's more than good enough. The Thanksgiving service the next day felt like a revelation to Genevieve. Walking into the small church beside Tom, her hand tucked in the crook of his arm and his mother's pendant gleaming at her throat, she no longer felt like an outsider or a charity case. The approving nods from Mrs. Hollister and the friendly greetings from neighbors confirmed what her heart already knew: she belonged here, with this man, in this community. As winter settled over the prairie, Tom's courtship proved as steady and sincere as the man himself. There were no grand gestures, but rather 100 small kindnesses: a book of poetry he'd traded for in town, wildflower honey for her tea, a carved wooden comb for her hair. Each evening brought them closer, conversations deepening as they shared their histories, their hopes, their fears. Genevieve learned that Tom had lost his parents young, raised primarily by an uncle who taught him ranching but little about tenderness. He'd ridden with cattle drives for years, saving every penny until he could afford his modest spread outside Salina. He spoke of his dreams of expanding the ranch someday, perhaps raising horses alongside the cattle. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Illinois, of her scholarly father who'd taught her to read Latin and her practical mother who'd ensured she could manage a household. She spoke of the fever that had taken them both within days of each other, leaving her alone in the world save for relatives who saw her as either a burden or an opportunity. Not anymore, Tom had said firmly, taking her hand. You're not alone anymore, Jen. Christmas brought a rare blizzard, trapping them at the ranch for 3 days. They spent the time in peaceful domesticity, Tom making repairs he'd put off, Genevieve experimenting with recipes. In the evenings, they read to each other by lamplight or simply talked, their conversations occasionally interrupted by kisses that grew increasingly passionate as their comfort with each other deepened. On the night before New Year's Eve, as they sat before the fire, Tom suddenly stood and disappeared into his bedroom. When he returned, his expression was a mixture of nervousness and determination. I had planned to wait until spring, he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. Thought it would be more proper. But these past months have been the happiest of my life, and I find I don't want to wait any longer. Genevieve's heart began to race as Tom dropped to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. Genevieve James, I know I'm just a simple rancher and perhaps you deserve better, but I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? He opened his other hand to reveal a ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect sapphire that caught the firelight. Tears sprang to Genevieve's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Tom, yes. His face split into a radiant smile as he slid the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. Where did you get this? Genevieve asked later, admiring how the sapphire gleamed against her finger. "Been saving for it since September," Tom admitted. "Had to send away to Kansas City for it. Mrs. Hollister's son brought it back when he came for Christmas." "September," Genevieve repeated, astonished. "But that was barely a month after I arrived." Tom's smile was sheepish. "Told you I knew my mind pretty early on." He kissed her hand where the ring now rested. "I didn't want to rush you, but I wanted to be prepared when the time came." Genevieve cupped his face in her hands. "I love you, Thomas Quinn. I think I started falling for you the moment you said this is your home now." Their wedding took place on a clear, crisp February morning in 1875. The small church in Salina was filled with neighbors and friends who had, over the months, come to accept and even embrace Genevieve as part of their community. Mrs. Hollister had helped with her dress, a simple gown of pale blue silk that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Hollister said, adjusting Genevieve's veil one last time. "Thomas is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Genevieve replied, thinking of how different her life might have been had she not collapsed on that dusty street and had Tom not been there to catch her. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. When Reverend Pearson pronounced them husband and wife, and Tom kissed her with tender reverence before the assembled congregation, Genevieve felt a sense of rightness, of homecoming, that transcended the physical place they would share. The small reception that followed at the town hall was a joyous affair, with music and dancing and enough food to make up for the lean times of the previous year. As Tom led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Genevieve couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought her here. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Quinn?" Tom asked, the new name bringing a flush of pleasure to her cheeks. "That I'm very glad I fainted at your feet," she replied with a smile. Tom laughed, pulling her closer. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that was." His expression grew serious. "I promise you, Jen, I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never go hungry or homeless again." "I know you will," she said softly. "And I'll spend mine making sure you never regret bringing me home that day." Their return to the ranch, their home that evening, marked the beginning of their shared life in earnest. The cabin that had once seemed merely functional to Genevieve now felt like the most precious place on earth, as Tom carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing with the sheer joy of the moment. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, new intimacies explored and a deeper bond forged between them. Genevieve listened to Tom's steady heartbeat beneath her ear and knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The drought that had plagued Kansas finally broke with gentle, soaking rains that turned the prairie a vibrant green. Tom and Genevieve worked side by side, planting an expanded vegetable garden and making improvements to the ranch house. With the money they'd saved over the winter, Tom purchased additional cattle and 2 fine horses, a steady mare for Genevieve and a spirited gelding for himself. Genevieve proved to be a natural horsewoman, quickly learning to help with the daily tasks of ranching. "My father never thought women should be confined to the house," she explained as they rode the boundaries of their property one mild April afternoon. "He believed in educating both the mind and the body." "Smart man, your father," Tom replied, watching with admiration as she easily guided her mount over a fallen log. "Though I reckon he'd be surprised to see his daughter turned rancher's wife." Genevieve laughed. "Perhaps, but he always said happiness was worth more than convention." She looked around at the rolling prairie, the distant herd of cattle, the man beside her. "And I've never been happier." As spring turned to summer, their ranch began to prosper. The rains continued at just the right intervals. The cattle fattened on abundant grass, and their garden yielded a bounty that Genevieve preserved for the coming winter. They added a new room to the cabin and improved the barn, working together with a harmony that made even the hardest tasks seem manageable. It was in late June, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, that Genevieve shared news that would change their lives again. "Tom," she said, her voice slightly tremulous with excitement, "I believe we'll need to prepare a nursery before winter." Tom turned to her, his expression momentarily confused before understanding dawned. "You mean, are you?" Genevieve nodded, her eyes shining. "Doctor Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. We're going to have a baby, Tom. Sometime in January, he thinks." With a whoop of joy, Tom swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around before hastily setting her down again. "Sorry, should I not do that? Will it hurt the baby? Are you feeling well? Do you need anything?" Laughing at his sudden concern, Genevieve placed a calming hand on his chest. "I'm perfectly fine, and so is the baby. Dr. Miller says I'm healthy as a horse and should have an easy time of it." Tom's expression was wonder-struck as he gently placed a hand on her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he murmured. "Our baby." "Yes," Genevieve agreed, covering his hand with her own. "Our family." The news of their coming child seemed to energize Tom even further. Throughout that summer and into fall, he worked from dawn till dusk, determined to make their ranch as prosperous and comfortable as possible before winter arrived with their baby. He built a proper crib from oak, carving intricate patterns of leaves and stars into the headboard. Genevieve sewed tiny garments and quilts, often sitting on the porch with Mrs. Hollister, who had taken it upon herself to instruct the young woman in the mysteries of childbirth and infant care. "Never seen Thomas so content," Mrs. Hollister remarked one afternoon as they watched Tom mending fences in the distance. "That man was meant to have a family, just needed the right woman to help him build it." Genevieve smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. "We saved each other, I think." As her pregnancy progressed, Genevieve's body changed, but so did her spirit. The last shadows of uncertainty and fear that had lingered from her time of hardship faded away, replaced by a deep-rooted confidence in herself and her future. Tom treated her with a mixture of reverence and practical support that made her love him all the more. The winter of 1875-76 proved mild compared to the previous year, for which both were grateful. As Christmas approached, Genevieve, now quite visibly pregnant, insisted on making the season special. "Our first Christmas as husband and wife, and our last before becoming parents," she explained as she directed Tom in hanging evergreen boughs throughout the cabin. "I want it to be memorable." They exchanged simple gifts on Christmas morning: a new hunting knife for Tom, crafted by the blacksmith in town. For Genevieve, a rocking chair Tom had secretly commissioned and hidden at a neighbor's barn until Christmas Eve. "For nursing our little one," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes, "and for telling stories when they are older." New Year's came and went, and January brought snowstorms that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Tom fretted about Genevieve's approaching confinement, but she remained serene, confident in her body's abilities and in the preparations they'd made. Mrs. Hollister had agreed to come stay with them when the time came, and Dr. Miller had promised to make the journey from town if weather permitted. Still, both knew that frontier births often happened without medical assistance, and they had prepared for that possibility as well. The baby decided to make its appearance on a clear, cold night in late January, just as a full moon rose over the prairie. Genevieve's labor began shortly after supper, the first contractions mild enough that she finished washing the dishes before informing Tom that it was time to fetch Mrs. Hollister. Tom rode out immediately, returning within 2 hours with the older woman in tow, her practical presence a calming influence in the increasingly tense atmosphere. As Genevieve's labor intensified, Tom found himself banished to the main room of the cabin, where he paced anxiously, wincing at each cry from the bedroom. "Men," Mrs. Hollister muttered as she emerged periodically for hot water or fresh linens. "Always acting like childbirth is some terrible tragedy instead of the most natural thing in the world." The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, a new voice joined the household, the lusty cry of Thomas Quinn, Jr., a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that Mrs. Hollister declared must have come from some ancestor or another. When Mrs. Hollister finally allowed Tom into the bedroom, he approached the bed with reverent steps, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Genevieve's arms. "Come meet your son," Genevieve said softly, her face tired but radiant. Tom sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect." Mrs. Hollister discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family to their private moment of wonder. "I was thinking we might call him Thomas James Quinn," Genevieve suggested. "After his father and my family name, we could call him TJ to avoid confusion." Tom nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Instead, he leaned down to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Thank you," he managed finally, "for everything, for our family." Genevieve smiled up at him, exhaustion and joy mingling in her expression. "Remember what you said to me that first day, this is your home now. You couldn't have known then how true those words would become." Tom took her free hand in his, squeezing gently. "I think maybe I did know, somewhere deep down. The moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you, like we were always meant to find each other. Even with me half dead from hunger and collapsed in the dust," Genevieve teased gently. "Especially then," Tom replied seriously. "You were fighting so hard to survive. How could I not admire that? How could I not want to help someone with that kind of spirit?" Genevieve gazed down at their son, now sleeping peacefully against her breast. "And now look at us. A family, a home, a future." "The best future I could imagine," Tom agreed. "Though I'm thinking our little TJ here might need a brother or sister someday." Genevieve laughed softly. "Let's get through the first few months with this one before we start planning the next, shall we?" The days and weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment as they learned to care for their newborn son. TJ proved to be a generally content baby, though his lusty cries when hungry or wet could be heard clear to the barn. Tom took to fatherhood with surprising ease, gladly changing diapers or walking the floor with TJ when he was fussy, allowing Genevieve much-needed rest. By spring, they had settled into new routines that accommodated their expanded family. Genevieve would strap TJ to her back while working in the garden or hang his basket from a sturdy tree branch where she could keep an eye on him. Tom often took the baby with him for short rides around the property, TJ securely nestled in a special carrier he'd fashioned for his saddle. "Starting him young," Tom would say with pride as the baby gurgled happily at the motion of the horse. "He'll be a fine horseman someday." The ranch continued to prosper that year, with favorable weather and increasing cattle prices allowing them to add more land to their holdings. They hired a young man named Samuel to help with the expanding herd, building a small bunkhouse for him at the edge of the property. As TJ grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged curious, stubborn, and affectionate, with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. By his first birthday, He was taking his first wobbly steps across the cabin floor, Tom and Genevieve cheering him on from either end of the room. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges met together, and joys shared. There were difficult times, a bout of croup that had TJ struggling to breathe one terrifying night, a prairie fire that threatened their western pasture, a financial setback when cattle prices temporarily dropped, but through it all, the bond between Tom and Genevieve only strengthened. In the spring of 1878, when TJ was just over 2 years old, Genevieve confirmed what Tom had already suspected: another baby was on the way. This pregnancy proved easier than her first, her body seemingly remembering the path it had traveled before. "A girl this time, I think," she told Tom as they lay in bed one night, his hand resting on her growing abdomen. "She moves differently than TJ did." "A daughter," Tom mused, his voice filled with wonder. "What shall we name her?" "I was thinking Grace," Genevieve replied, "after my mother." Tom nodded. "Grace Quinn. It has a nice sound to it." Grace arrived in November, right on schedule and with considerably less drama than her brother. She was a delicate-looking baby with wispy fair hair and her mother's green eyes, but she quickly proved to have a surprisingly strong personality, demanding attention with imperious cries when she felt neglected. TJ approached his new sister with cautious curiosity, eventually appointing himself her protector and constant companion. It warmed Genevieve's heart to see him carefully bringing his toys to show the baby or patting her gently when she cried. "He's going to be a good brother," Tom observed one evening as they watched TJ reading to Grace from his picture book, making up stories to go with the illustrations. "Just like his father is a good husband," Genevieve replied, leaning against Tom's shoulder. "Kind, protective, gentle." Tom kissed the top of her head. "Easy to be all those things when you love someone." As the years passed, the Quinn family and their ranch continued to grow and thrive. They added more land, more cattle, and eventually more help as the operation expanded beyond what one family could manage alone. Samuel, their first hire, eventually became ranch foreman, overseeing a small crew of hands who lived in the expanded bunkhouse. The original cabin grew too, with Tom adding rooms as their family and prosperity increased. By 1882, it had become a proper ranch house, with a large kitchen, separate bedrooms for the children, and even a small library where Genevieve homeschooled TJ and Grace in their early years. The children flourished in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost before they could walk properly, helping with age-appropriate chores, and developing the self-reliance and practical skills that frontier life demanded. TJ, now 7, showed a natural affinity for working with the horses, while 5-year-old Grace revealed an unexpected talent for numbers, often helping Genevieve with the ranch accounts despite her young age. In the summer of 1883, as they prepared to celebrate their 8th wedding anniversary, Tom surprised Genevieve with news that would once again change their lives. "Remember how we talked about maybe breeding horses someday?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were in bed. "Of course," Genevieve replied. "It's been a dream of yours since before we met." Tom nodded, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "Well, I've been corresponding with a breeder in Kentucky who's looking to establish a partnership out west. He has some fine thoroughbred stock he's willing to sell us at a fair price, and he'd take a percentage of future profits in return." Genevieve's eyes widened. "Tom, that's wonderful. But can we afford such an investment?" "I believe we can," he said, pulling out a ledger he'd prepared. "I've worked out all the figures. It would be tight for a year or two, but with the cattle operation as stable as it is now and with what we've saved." He hesitated. "What do you think, Jen?" It's a risk, I know, but I believe it could secure our future and the children's even more solidly. Genevieve studied the figures, impressed as always by Tom's careful planning. Though he'd had little formal education, he had a sharp mind for business and a cautious approach to expansion that had served them well. I think, she said slowly, that dreams are worth pursuing when they're built on solid ground, and you've certainly laid the groundwork for this one. She smiled at him. Let's do it, Tom. Let's breed horses. The Kentucky breeder arrived in September with 3 mares and a stallion of impressive lineage. The investment required building proper stables and fenced paddocks, hiring a groom with specific experience in horse breeding, and countless hours of work beyond their already busy schedule. But as the first foals arrived the following spring, even Genevieve had to admit the venture had been worth every sacrifice. "They're magnificent," she said, watching a leggy colt canter around the paddock, his movements already showing the grace and power that would make him valuable as either a racehorse or a breeding animal. "Just wait," Tom replied, his arm around her waist. "In 5 years, Quinn horses will be known throughout the West." His prediction proved accurate. By 1890, their breeding operation had developed a reputation for producing horses with both speed and stamina, qualities highly prized by everyone from wealthy ranchers to the cavalry. The financial security this brought allowed them to expand in other ways as well, adding modern conveniences to their home, ensuring the children received excellent education both at home and, eventually, at school in town, and even setting aside funds for future investments. TJ, now 15, had grown into a tall, serious young man who shared his father's love of ranching and horsemanship. He'd recently begun accompanying Tom on business trips to neighboring states, learning the commercial aspects of their operation. Grace, at 13, continued to show remarkable aptitude for mathematics, and had recently announced her intention to attend college someday, a declaration that might have shocked some frontier fathers, but that Tom had met with proud approval. "Your mother and I always believed in education," he told her. "No reason a girl shouldn't have the same opportunities as a boy, especially one with a mind like yours." In the autumn of 1890, as they prepared for what promised to be a particularly harsh winter, Tom and Genevieve found a quiet moment alone, a rarity in their busy household. "15 years since you found me in the dust," Genevieve mused, leaning against him as they watched the sunset from their porch. "Sometimes it seems like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime altogether." Tom's arm tightened around her shoulders. At 45, he was still strong and vital, though silver had begun to thread through his sandy hair. "Best thing I ever did, bringing you home that day." Genevieve smiled up at him. At 38, she remained beautiful in his eyes, the lines around her eyes and mouth only adding character to her face. "Even with all the trouble I've caused you since." "Trouble," Tom laughed. "You mean blessing me with 2 amazing children, helping build this ranch into what it is today. Standing by me through every hardship and celebrating every victory." He kissed her softly. "If that's trouble, then I hope you never stop causing it." As they stood there in the fading light, the silhouette of their substantial home behind them and the vast expanse of their ranch stretching before them, both reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from a starving woman collapsed in the dust and a lonely cowboy with a spare room and an open heart, to partners in every sense, builders of a legacy that would outlast them both. "I love you, Thomas Quinn," Genevieve said softly. "Thank you for making this my home." "I love you too, Genevieve Quinn," he replied, his voice rich with the depth of feeling that had only grown over their years together. and it's been my privilege to share it with you." As darkness fell over the Kansas prairie, they turned together toward the warm lights of their home, where their children waited, and their future continued to unfold, a future built on the foundation of that simple, life-changing moment when a starving woman collapsed in the dust, and a kind-hearted cowboy offered her bread and shelter, and, unknowingly, the beginning of a love that would define them both. The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the Quinn family and their thriving ranch. TJ grew into his role as his father's right hand, eventually taking over day-to-day management of the cattle operation, while Tom focused on their increasingly prestigious horse breeding business. Grace, true to her word, attended college in Chicago, one of the few women in her class returning with a degree in mathematics, and a determination to apply her knowledge to expanding the family enterprises. By the turn of the century, the modest spread that Tom had started with had grown into one of the most respected ranches in Kansas, known for both its superior livestock and its progressive business practices. The original cabin was now preserved as a guest house, while the main residence had been expanded into a comfortable home that balanced frontier practicality with modern conveniences. In 1902, TJ married Elizabeth Harper, the spirited daughter of a neighboring rancher, bringing another strong woman into the Quinn family fold. Grace, to everyone's surprise, fell in love with and married James Parker, a professor she had met during her college years, who willingly relocated to Kansas to be with her. Together they established a small but excellent school on the ranch property, initially for the children of ranch employees, but eventually serving families from miles around. Through all the changes and expansions, Tom and Genevieve remained the heart of the Quinn Ranch, their partnership a model for their children and grandchildren. Though they gradually ceded daily responsibilities to the younger generation, they remained involved and engaged, their experience and wisdom valued by all. In the spring of 1910, as they approached their 35th wedding anniversary, Tom and Genevieve decided to take a long-deferred journey. Despite their prosperity, neither had traveled far from Kansas since establishing their home there. Now, with the ranch in capable hands, they embarked on a train journey that would take them first to Illinois, where Genevieve paid respects at her parents' graves, then on to Kentucky to visit their horse breeding partners, and finally to New York City, where they marveled at the skyscrapers and bustling streets so different from the open plains they called home. "It's another world," Genevieve observed as they stood atop the newly completed Metropolitan Life Tower looking out over Manhattan. "So many people, so much energy." "Impressive," Tom agreed, "but I'll take our prairie any day." "There's something to be said for space to breathe and stars you can actually see at night." Genevieve squeezed his hand. "I feel exactly the same way. I'm glad we came, but I'll be even happier to go home. Home." The word still held such meaning for them both, encompassing not just the physical place but the life they had built together, the family they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. Upon their return to the ranch, they were greeted by a gathering of family, friends, and employees, 3 generations of Quinns, and the extended community that had grown around them. TJ and Elizabeth's 3 children, Thomas Roman III, Robert, and Anna, rushed to welcome their grandparents with excited stories of events they had missed. Grace and James's twins, Sarah and Michael, presented them with carefully drawn pictures of the ranch, so you won't forget what it looks like next time you go away. Looking around at the faces of those gathered to welcome them, their children, grandchildren, loyal employees who had become like family, Neighbors who had stood with them through good times and bad. Tom and Genevieve felt a profound sense of fulfillment. From the most desperate of beginnings had grown this abundant life, this network of connections and care. Later that night, as they sat on the porch of the main house, a nightly ritual they had maintained through all the years, Tom reached for Genevieve's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, the familiar banter as comfortable as a well-worn quilt. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "All those fancy buildings in New York got me thinking about what we've built here. Not just the house or the barns or the business, but everything. Our family, our place in this community." Genevieve nodded, understanding as she always did the deeper currents beneath his words. "From nothing to something that will outlast us both. Not bad for a half-starved drifter and a lonely cowboy. We did good, didn't we?" Tom's gaze swept over their property, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. "Better than I ever dreamed possible that day I found you in the dust." "We did," Genevieve agreed softly. At 63, her auburn hair had faded to a soft silver, but her green eyes remained bright and clear. "Though I suspect our grandchildren will take what we've built and make it even better." "No doubt about that," Tom chuckled. "Young Thomas already has plans for expanding the horse breeding operation. And have you seen the improvements Michael's suggested for the irrigation system? Boy's barely 12 and already thinking like an engineer." They fell into companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their beginning, that had shone down on their small cabin as they took their first tentative steps toward building a life together, now illuminated an empire of sorts, modest by some standards, perhaps, but rich beyond measure in the ways that truly mattered. "Do you ever wonder," Genevieve asked softly, "what might have happened if I'd collapsed in front of someone else's home that day? Or if you hadn't been on your porch at that exact moment?" Tom's grip on her hand tightened. "I try not to. The thought of you continuing on alone, or of me spending all these years without you." He shook his head. "Some things are just meant to be, Jen. I believe that with all my heart." "As do I," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And I'm grateful every day for whatever force of fate or divine intervention brought me to your doorstep." "Hungry and half dead," Tom added wryly. "But never defeated," Genevieve countered. "And never alone again from that moment on." As night settled fully over the prairie, bringing with it the familiar chorus of cicadas and distant coyotes, Tom and Genevieve Quinn remained on their porch, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, purpose, and the true meaning of home. The simple act of kindness that had started their journey, a piece of bread offered to a starving stranger, a safe harbor provided without expectation of return, had multiplied over the decades into a legacy of generosity, resilience, and love that would continue to flourish long after they were gone, carried forward by the generations they had nurtured and the values they had lived. In the grand tapestry of the American West, theirs was perhaps a small thread, but it was strong and true, weaving together the best of what humanity could be when compassion met courage, when need met generosity, when two people committed to building something lasting together. And it had all begun with those simple, life-changing words. "This is your home now.